Life. It's not just a party trick played by humans with an advanced sense of humor. But even though we ourselves are living examples of biological machines, we don't actually know how life began on Earth. And we have a lot of questions. Like, why do we die? Why do male nipples exist? And most importantly, what was the very first thing that was alive? With modern technology, we've then managed to come up with a few theories that could explain how life got started here on Earth. So let's get started. The big question. For decades, scientists had believed that the conditions on early Earth were so hostile that it is simply not possible for life to have evolved here. Well, they might be right, but scientists also think that life did evolve on Earth, despite the presence of giant volcanoes. No ozone layer, lots of lightning, and an atmosphere that would make anyone with asthma have an aneurysm. But within all of that mess was a perfect ingredient for life: water. Lots and lots of water. In fact, according to our best estimates, 75% of Earth's surface was covered in ocean water. And it wasn't boiling hot like we see today in places like Yellowstone National Park. Instead, it was just warm enough to allow simple chemical reactions to take place. One theory for how life began is known as the primordial soup theory. This idea suggests that organic molecules formed in Earth's early oceans, sparking the first building blocks of life. These organic molecules are the kind that we associate with biology, things like proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates. Today, these molecules only form under very specific circumstances, usually with a lot of help from cells. But back then, maybe there were different conditions, and those organic molecules just sort of happened, at least according to the primordial soup theory. Maybe instead of forming inside of cells, the first organic molecules formed in the surrounding primordial soup. Scientists don't know exactly what caused these molecules to spontaneously assemble into those building blocks of life, but they think it might have been the energy from lightning strikes or ultraviolet radiation bombarding the surface of the Earth. When those big inorganic molecules were zapped with enough energy, they may have broken apart and reassembled into the building blocks of life. In 1952, two scientists named Stanley Miller and Harold Urey performed a famous experiment that demonstrated how simple molecules could form amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. They mixed water vapor, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen in a container, and then electrified it. After a week of letting this mixture sit and react, they found that 2% of it was composed of amino acids. This experiment showed that life's building blocks could arise naturally under conditions similar to those on early Earth. However, the Miller-Urey experiment was based on some assumptions about the conditions on early Earth. We now know that those conditions may have actually been quite different than what was inside of their container. So while this experiment showed that it was possible for amino acids to form under the right conditions, we still don't know if those conditions actually existed on early Earth. Hydrothermal vents. While the primordial soup theory suggests that life began in Earth's oceans, another idea proposes that it actually started much deeper in the oceans around hydrothermal vents. These are cracks in the ocean floor that spew out superheated water and chemicals. In the depths of the ocean, far away from the sun, these vents are home to entire ecosystems powered by chemicals rather than sunlight. Organisms around these vents use chemotrophy to produce food. Chemotrophs are bacteria that get their energy by breaking down inorganic compounds, such as sulfur and iron. So while we don't find plants or algae in these ecosystems, we do find lots of microbes. And those microbes seem to thrive despite being incredibly far from the sun. That's important because the sun didn't always shine down on Earth the way it does today. In fact, the young sun was much dimmer than it is now. Some scientists think that the dim sun, combined with Earth's thick atmosphere, meant that life could have arisen near the surface of the Earth. So instead, hydrothermal vents may have been the only places where there was enough warmth and chemical energy to support life. RNA world. Once life began on Earth, it didn't take long to start evolving. One of the major steps along the way was the development of cells, which contain all of the necessary machinery to reproduce. But before cells could evolve, something had to carry genetic information from one generation to the next. And scientists believe that molecule was RNA. RNA, like DNA, can store genetic information. But unlike DNA, RNA is single-stranded and can fold in on itself. This means that RNA can both store genetic information and catalyze reactions like proteins, which makes it a great candidate for the first true self-replicating molecule. Eventually, RNA was replaced by DNA as the primary molecule for storing genetic information. But this RNA world may have been the crucial step between non-living matter and the first cells, meteorites. Not all scientists think that the building blocks of life arose on Earth. In fact, some think that they came from space. About 4 billion years ago, a large meteorite thought to be about 6 miles across slammed into Earth. Scientists think this collision could have contributed to the building blocks of life. Maybe pieces of that asteroid contained the organic molecules that eventually became part of the first cells. And this isn't just speculation. Scientists have actually found evidence of organic molecules in meteorites. In 1969, the first spacecraft to explore Mars landed on the planet and left behind a scoop containing Martian soil. A year later, that scoop was found to contain amino acids. Then in 1980, the first space probe to return samples from an asteroid found amino acids there too. And while scientists haven't found amino acids in every meteorite, they have found other organic molecules. So it's likely that organic material from space has rained down on Earth since the beginning of time. In fact, NASA believes that the building blocks of life may have arrived on a ship called panspermia. Panspermia is basically the idea that life forms can survive the vacuum of space and then land on another planet or moon where it can continue to thrive. So while it's not proven that meteorites brought the first building blocks of life to Earth, it's definitely a possibility. Water. If life did begin on Earth, it wouldn't have been possible without one very special ingredient: water. As we mentioned earlier, the early Earth was pretty hot, but thanks to its abundant water, it wasn't scorching hot. Water also acted as a solvent, meaning it dissolved many substances, allowing chemical reactions to occur. Here on Earth, we're used to having all of the water we need readily available. But for most of the universe, water is nowhere to be found. So we really got lucky. Even though water is common throughout the Milky Way galaxy, it's very rare to find in exactly the right amount needed for it to exist in liquid form. Stars produce water when they die, and planets can hold on to that water if they reach close enough to their star. But if a planet is too close, the water evaporates. If it's too far, the water freezes. Thanks to the perfect distance from the sun and the insulating effects of the atmosphere, Earth retained its liquid water for billions of years. And that allowed life to flourish. First, microbes. Despite the lack of oxygen, Earth's early atmosphere was full of gases like nitrogen, carbon dioxide, ammonia, and methane. It wasn't until photosynthetic microbes evolved that oxygen started to fill Earth's atmosphere. But once that happened, Earth transformed from a place that could only support single-celled organisms to a place where multicellular life could thrive. Before the evolution of photosynthesis, Earth's surface was largely lifeless. There's evidence of microbial life dating back 35 billion years. At first, these were probably just single-celled prokaryotes. But after photosynthesis evolved, oxygen started to accumulate in the atmosphere. Eventually, the amount of oxygen increased enough that the atmosphere formed a protective ozone layer that shielded Earth's surface from harmful UV rays. And that paved the way for life to move from the oceans onto dry land. Great oxidation. It took millions of years, but eventually the oxygen produced by microbes filled Earth's atmosphere. This event is known as the Great Oxidation. But this increase in oxygen had a negative effect on some of the existing life. For example, the rising oxygen levels eventually caused a mass extinction of anaerobic bacteria. But it also cleared the way for new kinds of life to evolve. Eventually, around 540 million years ago, multicellular organisms started to appear. As life grew more complex, organisms became larger and more active. And while that meant they required more energy, they also had to find ways to stay cool. This led to the evolution of sweat glands and limbs to support body weight outside of water. From single cell to multicell. As more and more oxygen filled Earth's atmosphere, it enabled new forms of life to flourish. Around 540 million years ago, the first clear fossils of multicellular organisms appeared. But while there's evidence of life on Earth dating back 8 billion years, scientists aren't sure when exactly the transition from single cell to multicell happened. Maybe it happened over a period of millions of years. There's evidence of organisms that might have been colonies of single-celled organisms living together. Over time, these colonies became more differentiated. Some cells began to perform different tasks. Cells started to communicate with each other. Eventually, this led to the first clear ancestors of plants, animals, and fungi. And then it took another 480 million years before the first humans appeared. Mysteries that remain. While scientists have some theories about how life began, there are still a lot of questions that remain. For example, we don't know if the building blocks of life came from within Earth or from outer space. And we don't know exactly how the first cell formed. We also don't know why life began in the first place. Maybe it was a fluke, a 1 in a trillion chance event that will never happen again. Or maybe life arises easily given the right conditions. And if that's the case, it means that what happened here on Earth might be happening elsewhere in the universe too. Implications for extraterrestrial life. If scientists ever discover life elsewhere in the universe, it could provide clues about how life began on Earth. Maybe life doesn't arise on its own. Maybe life is seeded by some greater intelligence. Or maybe life follows the same patterns wherever the conditions are right. So the implications for discovering extraterrestrial life go well beyond answering the question of whether or not we are alone in the universe. Finding life elsewhere could help us better understand where we came from. Emotional reflection. When thinking about our origins, it's easy to feel small. We are just tiny specks of dust floating through a never-ending expanse of space. But we shouldn't. Even though we are small and fragile, we have an incredible ability to observe, explore, and understand our surroundings. We learned to walk upright and freed our hands to create tools and make art. We built societies and explored unknown lands. We launched rockets into space and walked on the moon. In a very real way, we read the universe looking back at itself, asking questions about existence, and trying to understand our place in it. And in doing that, we've already begun to answer some of those questions. We may not know exactly how we came to be, but we do know that our story is a remarkable one. Click here to watch this video on how the universe began, or click here to watch this video. As always, this has been my channel. Don't forget to keep on thinking.